All right, welcome to our Friday Flex. This is your host, Keith and Joseph. We are here with you on this wonderful Friday morning, and we're going to go over the mind control aspect of the fourth session. If you've been watching, we've been talking about the different senses: the sense of taste, touch, sight. And there's three more senses that we'll go into and how they affect the mind. And so today we'll talk about the sense of touch. And then...
All right, Omarion. Touch.
And then we'll go over hearing. And so one of the things that I wanted to, as you all know, we try to bring different forms of information, whether from NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, different non-secular texts from the Abrahamic tradition, from the Eastern tradition, the yoga texts and so forth, to give a more holistic, more well-rounded approach to how these everyday things that we deal with the senses, the sense of sight and touch and so many things, how they affect the mind of one who is not properly trained. And so one of the things I was reading a little earlier today was out of the yoga text, and it was explaining, I think it was 242 of the text called the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, 267, sorry. 267. And it was saying how any one of the roaming senses meaning like the sense of taste, touch, smell, and sight, any one of those senses, if they are not properly trained, can pretty much destroy someone's intelligence. And so today, as I mentioned, we'll go over the sense of touch and also the sense of hearing. And I think, especially today with this discussion, it will be a little more comprehensive in the sense of we deal with the sense of touch in every day-to-day basis. You know, I mean, when we see each other, we give them a hug, we do so many
high fives, stuff like that, handshakes,
as a way to reciprocate or as a way to connect to others. So to get down to the nitty-gritty, as of course the sense of touch is, as we talked about, something that acquires knowledge. So my daughter's always touching stuff, always grabbing for things, beards and all these other things too.
Glasses,
earrings, to be able to develop some type of understanding of what is this texture, what is this, this thing, like she'll grab my lip and then pull,
That's what happened.
So if you see some scratch marks, it's my daughter. But as we get older, we're more familiar with different sensations of touch. But there's a few sensations, even in dealing with the flesh or dealing with the touch sensation, that different spiritual traditions talk about in greater or lesser detail. And even in the Abrahamic tradition, more specifically, the Bible talks about how the flesh is weak. And it's not like, you're doing like arm wrestling competition with the flesh. It's not like that, but it's more like the ability and the kind of experience that we can perceive through the flesh is so strong that it can disturb or it can even redirect the mind of a person who's properly trained. For example, and we'll talk about the conception of sexuality, and so and how, and I'm not saying intimacy, because intimacy can be just conversation. Intimacy can be some type of activity that's not sexual. But generally, our society right now is led is pretty much ran by the impulse of sex desire.
They say sex sells.
Sex sells. Yeah. Facts tells, sex sells. You know? So I was thinking about the concept of athletes and how some athletes, especially those who have to exert a lot of physical strength, like boxers, or those in the MMA, Muay Thai tradition, like those individuals, they have to restrain from the sex activity or releasing the essence, which is the semen or the that vital energy from the body. 4 months. They have to stop that activity 4 months before they get into any, or 3 months before any big fight. And it's explained that this, the reason why this is recommended and pretty much enforced when you get to higher levels of athletic competition is because the vital energy that is released from the body makes one weak, makes their sense of reaction much slower, makes their ability to perceive things much slower, and they do not have that athletic advantage that their opponent may have. And it's really unique because we don't think about what happens on a physiological level whenever the act of sex happens, or the outcome of sex. And different traditions talk about the purpose being producing a being, an offspring,
child,
you know, some type of progeny into this world. But because, as we talked about earlier, sex sells, then you have this concentration, overstimulation on, let's just get people where they're most susceptible to being weakened or...
Basically, hit them where they're soft, you know, where they're most vulnerable. You mentioned this, what was that word you just said? Not vulnerable, not soft. It was another word. You said something, not intimate.
Sexual?
No. No, as you were speaking, because I was also thinking about how when we used to run track, we were also given the same explanation. When you're running track, you don't want to engage in any sexual activity, of course. We were all in high school, you know, but you still had some young guys that were just running around doing whatever anyway. And it's because it, in short, kind of makes you a little dull, right? Your senses are not quick, your reflexes are not as quick. And we see in various different texts, yoga texts and so forth, they point out, and this is like coming from like different traditions, like even Buddhist tradition and so forth, you see how they point out that energy that one can use for creating a being, and when someone is not necessarily trying to have children, but they're just having sex willy-nilly, you know, like rabbits or anything like that, or they're losing their seminal fluid, right? That energy is lost when what they could have done if they wanted to is invest that same energy into some other creative aspect of themselves. And so we hear in different yoga texts how those who are monks can take their seminal fluid, for lack of better words, or you could say take that creative energy and then bring it up to their head or to their brain, and how it actually helps with those finer connective tissues that are there in the brain to strengthen and make the brain healthier. But when that energy and those nutrients are not brought up here, instead is released through some sexual activity, then again, even the brain is just described in the Vedas that the brain is not as sharp. So when it comes down to learning, It could be students in a school, education. And what speak of being a monk, on a spiritual path.
Yeah.
That energy is not being, or those nutrients are not being put here to work on those finer, cells and connective tissues, but it's, again, lost through sexual activity. So it's encouraged in those texts to be regulated.
Regulators.
If you're going to engage in any sexual activity, make sure that it is fruitive, meaning that you're going to do it for procreating, but not just whimsically or for whatever reason where you're losing vital nutrients that could be used for strengthening your brain.
And it's really important too, because in school, whether it's K through 12 or in college, unless you're in the sports, you don't really hear
No, you don't.
the effects of releasing and the energy or the potency that keeping this energy within the body has on one's day-to-day activities. And so because there's no education, there's no information, you have young children who are highly sexualized because they're watching it on TV, they're watching it magazines, books,
YouTube, or any videos and stuff like that. Music videos.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to wait until like late at night when a BET they call Uncut. BET Uncut. Just to see what I couldn't see during the daytime, just wow, look at that.
Or Spring Break.
A Spring Break.
MTV, Spring Break.
Yeah. And it was funny because or sad, because these things, even at that time in the 90s, became available to children of a young age. And then you get to school, you're like, wow, you may be able to do what I saw this girl do on TV or this guy do on TV or whatever. Yeah. So the mind already starts seeing, so through this activity of dancing and so forth in a highly sexualized way, that leads to, as soon as I get one-on-one with someone of my desire, then the activity that is so highly acclaimed, so highly, celebrated will happen. Yeah. And then what happens when one doesn't think about the repercussions? You have unwanted children that's in society. Yeah. And there's more and more now, because back in the 90s, there were less teenage pregnancies than there are, I would say, at this time in history, because more people, the amount of access to information, especially sexual information, is so much more prevalent that it's like, let's, let me not say pregnancy, but sexual activity. That may be a little more accurate, where you have people in middle school and even younger saying, I saw this on TV, let's try this out.
Those kids were doing that when I was in middle school. And I was in private school. And those kids were engaged in inappropriate activities. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's not like any of these spiritual texts are admonishing or saying that this activity is wrong by definition, but it's so sacred that it should not be frivolously done.
Right.
And because of that lack of understanding, we're just very frivolous in our activities. And because of that frivolous nature, and because of this conception of YOLO.
You only live once. I learned this word last week, I think.
Yeah, yes. Because of this idea of YOLO, it's like, why not? You know, if I go around extracting pleasure from objects of desire, what's wrong with that?
But let's kind of look back into a little bit more, you know, this release and what brings one to that point of wanting to release and seek such pleasure. When you have individuals who are in a pressurized environment, highly stressful, right? It doesn't matter what it is. I remember the neighborhood that we grew up in, 19167 Ferguson was the house that we lived in Detroit. House is burnt down now. Tree is sitting on it and everything. But those neighborhoods where you got crack houses, other burnt down houses, and you are basically walking up and down the street in fear in one sense. And so everything is stressful. You go to school and you have to defend and fight for yourself because you don't know who's going to try to grab you. You know, there's so much craziness, drugs and so forth. You know, in Detroit, you probably seen it because you're from the east side, but on the west side, there's the schools, they also had, you know, drug-free zone. Like, wow, like it's posted, and then the police officer is there at the entrance, you know, because, and then there's a security team, you know, to see if you have any metal, like guns or any knives or any other weapons of, you know, like this on you. And it's like the kids, when they go to school, they're not going into a calm, pleasant environment. It's like a war zone, basically. And then the street, you have different gangs and other criminal activity. So people are so stressed and under a lot of pressure to perform in school. You know, your parents may not necessarily listen to you. If they see that you're interacting with this person, that person, because again, parents, they grew up a certain way too, where you don't question what your parents tell you to do.
Right.
And even if they whip you, stop all that crying. You're not even allowed to cry. Stop crying, shut up, you know.
Yeah.
And so the parents are stressed. They're working multiple jobs, you know, just to get by, for lack of better words. The kids are also stressed, and they're not connecting properly with their parents. They're not bonding through touch in one sense, and we can dive into that for a hot second too. But again, there's so much stress and so much tension that what can one do to release all this pent up energy? And sometimes sex is described as being the greatest release of all that energy. And I get it in terms of if you don't want to reach this breaking point, do that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we don't see that it's entangling. Like once you get started, it's like heroin or some type of opioid. You know, they think, oh, it's just, I only just did it once, you know.
Right.
No big deal.
Right.
But then they get an addiction, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, I cannot find anything else that gives this type of release or this type of pleasure. Then let me just keep doing it until the break of dawn or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
And so it's unfortunate that, as you have rightly pointed out, the youth aren't being educated in terms of course, sexuality and the importance of keeping it sacred.
Right.
And so they're just learning from other people on the street or what they see within society, because the TV, meaning music videos, other like movies and sitcoms and stuff like that, that's basically what is being advertised. You can't even go down the street without seeing a billboard that looks a certain way with a lady dressed a certain way in a provocative way to trying to convince you to buy a car, even what to speak of buy a razor blade. You can't even buy lotion without there being a woman involved, you know? So all these different things are, shall I say, we are, even as youth, we're being bombarded with this sex. then eventually one's going to crack. You know, it's almost like that. Almost like that water torture. You know, they just drop. You know, they tie you up, but they drop water on you. Not that someone did that to me before.
You talking about waterboarding?
Oh, I don't know if it's called waterboarding or whatever,
okay.
but you know, it's like a torture form. You know, and they drop. You know, they continue to drop water on you until you just crack. And you know, so we're constantly being prodded and poked all the time with this sex. You know, then when certain things come up, that's the first thought that comes to your mind. Well, you know, let me just go have sex. Because that's how advertisement works.
Right, yeah.
They keep putting this message out there over and over and over again. So then when you are in a situation where you need to make a decision, that sex will be your decision, not, let me think about this carefully and go about it differently. You know?
Let me deliberate on it, yeah.
Right, let me deliberate on it, exactly. So we don't think about it, we just go with that impulse, like, oh, this is what I want to do. But then afterwards we find ourselves miserable.
Yeah.
We feel that you're depleted, you don't have any energy, you're like, man, why did I do that? It's just like you had mentioned this one story about, you know, drinking, and the person gets wasted, they got their head in the toilet bowl and they're vomiting. They're like, why am I doing this? Or why did I do this to myself? But then next weekend, they do it again.
Yeah.
It's like it's never enough. But then we're on this roller coaster, or maybe you can say we're on a hamster wheel because we're not making any progress.
Right.
And we just need better solutions or better alternatives in terms of how to deal with this pent-up energy.
I think you mentioned the opioid crisis. And I remember, I think it was in 2005, I got in a pretty bad car accident. And of course it wasn't, you know, nothing was broken, it was fractured. But I was in a little bit of pain, enough to encourage the use of some type of painkiller. And
I'll be right back.
And so so when I went to the hospital, they said, well, you know, in order to reduce the pain, we'll have to give you some type of strong pain medicine. So this time it was Oxycontin. It was
Oxycodone or something like that. I can't remember how it's pronounced.
And I was like, okay, let me try this. So I tried it, and the pain, of course, you know, there was a high milligram dosage. The pain went away. I was like, wow, this feels great. You know, it's like just, you know, it's almost like anybody that's been in pain and has taken a painkiller, depending how strong it is, it does something to the body in which makes everything feel real relaxed, and you just feel real tingly and so forth. And it got to a point that even after my pain was gone, I was still seeking that sensation, that touch that I had while on this Oxycontin, this opioid. I was like, wow, this feels great, you know? And I realized, I was like, no, this could be a bad habit. You know, this could take me down a wrong, you know, very treacherous journey. And so fortunately, because I had some level of intelligence, I was able to kick it.
That's good. I was thinking about, what's that guy? Tyrone Bigsby, you know, from Davis and Pale. It's like, hey man, you got any more of that Oxycontin?
But it gave me some small glimpse into why we have an opioid crisis. Because the feeling that the body has is over exaggerated in the sense of indifferent, without being too descriptive. The body can experience altered states of heightened pleasure through even spiritual activities. But because we're so used to artificial activities, things that require us to ingest it or to whatever, then we get this understanding that this must be the goal of life. This is why everything I do must be centered around that. Which is why everything in society, as you mentioned, is centered around the idea of sex life. And of course, for those who are just tuning in, there's nothing wrong with having an intimate relationship, a sexual relationship with that person you love. But so many times, the measurement of love in society now is based on how much pleasure someone can give to our body.
Yeah. And that's a huge problem because then we start, again, just to recap, there isn't anything wrong with having sex with another person. But when we see that person, just like you rightly pointed out, nothing but an object for our lusty desires, then we miss out on connecting intimately with that person. Because as you rightly point out, intimacy, in short, doesn't have anything to do with sex.
Right.
Intimacy could just simply be two individuals having a conversation on how they connect with each other. But what brings forth or allow that intimacy to take place is that there must be trust, and that those individuals have to be willing to put themselves in a vulnerable position. It's just like they say when cards, like you show your hand, basically. It's like, this is who I am. You know, these are my gains and areas of growth.
Yeah. This is all I got.
This is all I got, you know. Stretch marks included, you know, whatever it may be. And so that willingness to put yourself in a vulnerable position, knowing very well that the other person could hurt you.
Right.
You know, in terms of take whatever information that you're sharing out of confidentiality, and maybe they may put that out in the world, what have you. But both individuals truly trusting each other and speaking and sharing their hearts and confidentiality, which we were talking about as love and exchange before, early on, you know, when we started these podcasts, the 6 types of love and exchange is to share your heart and confidence. That taking place is, and then keeping that in a sacred place, that's that intimacy, you know, that we're talking about. But in terms of just sex, do you know how many times someone goes from one person to another person to another person, trying to fill a void in their own lives, like this emptiness. And they think, if I just have sex with this person, I'm going to feel great, and my life is going to be like a fairy tale, you know, like you hear in, you know, Cinderella story or whatever like this. And then after some time, that relationship just falls apart. And everything just feels like, why am I with this person? And again, they go after another person. Oh, something new, refreshing. And they have sex with that person, but it's the same pattern that gets repeated over and over again. It's because they're using sex for the wrong reason. Meaning the intention behind it is not pure in itself. Because their intention is just simply selfish.
Right.
They're only just thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not that, oh, hey, baby, I'll let you finish first. I'll come right after. You know, it shouldn't be about that either.
Right.
Even though that sounds considerate. But the point is being missed.
Yeah.
Is that, let's put it this way. What if they both become paralyzed? They couldn't even move. There ain't no wiggling about it at all. Can intimacy still take place? And yes, it can. You know? And so, again, even the sex is just only just as they say, like a cherry on top. It's not the main focus. It's about the us. in the relationship. Really connecting deeply and intimately and bonding with that person. Right. The trust is there, the confidentiality is there. That's what keeps the relationship going, because as you go deeper and deeper in that relationship, you find something new about that person. You're constantly learning something new, and you're like, wow, this person never ceases to amaze me. And the respect is there too, right? Because they have to have the respect. And so it is that which, on that higher platform or level, is what, again, allows those two individuals to go deeper in that relationship. But if it's only just superficial and shallow, meaning it's only just sex, and that's it, then no, the relationship doesn't last long, because, again, it's shallow and it's just superficial.
You mentioned, I guess, you didn't say prerequisites, but...
Prereqs.
Prereqs.
No.
Would be trust and then vulnerability.
Yes.
And so we live in a society in which I remember B.T. Swami mentioned very nicely.
B.E.T. Swami? No? Okay, I'm sorry. Oh man, I knew I'm going out there.
So you mentioned, it was mentioned by B.T. Swami that we live in a society in which we love things and use people instead of loving people and using things.
Yes.
And so we see there's so much emphasis on technology. Oh, I need to buy this new thing.
Yes.
And we see this person, the opposite sex or same sex or whatever, and we see them as a outlet for our sexual desire.
Correct.
And if we were to lose the phone, we would be more concerned than losing the relationship in which we had, which there was some connection with, because we're loving things and using people.
Yeah. One of his disciples used to share with me. He says that, and it's tied in with what you had just basically said about a lot of times people use others as a means to an end. Meaning we're using people, we're just exploiting and taking advantage of people just for our own, gain, or trying to get to a certain, goal, what have you. But he says we should not use people as a means to an end, meaning where we're exploiting them, but we should see them as an end in themselves. Meaning we should pour into each other. We should learn how to love and appreciate, each other and respect each other and connect deeply with each other, not to see how we can exploit each other. Because ultimately, even if we say YOLO, you only have one life to live. Let's just say that this is the only body you have. Let's just ignore reincarnation and whatsoever, right? Let's just focus on this is only life. You only live once, right? What type of happiness, and I mean real happiness, does one derive when we're simply exploiting and using people? Like every person we come across, we're just simply exploiting people and basically literally burning bridges. Like at the end of the day, you really don't find yourself as a happy person. Because if everyone else is also doing it, then we too are getting exploited and used and manipulated. And no one, I don't recall a single person, at least I haven't heard of any person who said, hey, Keith, I love being used.
Use me.
Use me. I mean, I've never had anyone come up, or I've never heard of anyone say, I love being exploited. I love being taken advantage of. Here, pick my pockets.
Take it.
Just take it.
Whatever's mine is yours now.
Have you ever seen someone come up and say, freeze, give me your money. Wow, I've been waiting for you my entire life. Here, take the cards.
Take the cards.
Here's my car keys.
Right.
Have you ever seen anyone that was so happy to get robbed?
No.
No. You buy something like, let's say you buy a new house, and in the pictures it shows you like a very nice, beautiful home, and you're like, wow, let's go buy this house, or let's go buy this car. Let's go buy the car. Mm-hmm. And you're like, wow, this car is amazing. This is great. Sure, I'll buy it. And then I've come across this when I was selling cars in Toyota, so that's why I'm kind of giving an actual true story. That the person, and it wasn't at my dealership. These are people buying cars at a B lot. Like someone that they don't even take care of the cars at all. They just, here, you can buy the car. It's clean inside, but buy the car. They buy the car. And then like maybe a month later, the transmission is completely gone. They just spent $8,000 on this car that's, you know, they thought was going to last them for, let's say, the next 10 years, maybe. And they lost $8,000. They buy this vehicle, and they come up to Toyota where I'm working, and they're like, I just bought a vehicle. It's not funny, but it's really sad. And basically, I'm very upset because I bought it from this place. They won't take the car back. They said, you know, buyer's warning, buyer's guide, you know, as is, you know. So they're not going to take the car back. And I just spent $8,000 on this thing. I need a car that's reliable.
Right.
You know, so they're very upset. I've never seen a person say, wow, I just bought a lemon. Yeah. You know, there's no one person that will be gung-ho and geeked about being exploited or manipulated or used or taken advantage of. We're being abused. I mean, it's just another form of violence. You know, let's call it what it is. We're constantly being abused and harassed all the time. Have you seen a happy, smiling face anywhere?
It's rare.
No.
It's rare.
You rarely find someone that is truly happy. And it's because of these issues. Mailman.
Yeah.
So this has to be resolved. It has to be resolved.
Yeah.
And one thing is, it's good that we're talking about it here because that way we can shine some light on it.
Light.
And we can remind each other of why it's important that we, again, have deep, meaningful relationships with, you know, our family, so that's our siblings, loved ones, children, so on and so forth, so that life is actually fulfilling.
You mentioned, and you mentioned something that took my mind to a place in which I think some of those watching may have experienced in their own life. But when the sense of touch, the sense of stimulation is considered like highest when it comes to sex, that exploitation sometimes happens in family.
That's true.
And
that's very true.
And whenever they're saying now that the amount of child pornography, the amount of sibling or what do you call that? Incestual action is now increasing. There's a shocking number, and I don't know if it's 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 10, but it's dangerously high that those people who we either live with or are related by blood, because of the desire for sex is so strong, will even pervert one's relationship. They're not really taking care of their family member, but they're using that family member based on how much pleasure can I derive from this particular relationship, sexually.
We saw that with the movie Antoine Fisher. Antoine, he was first of all, he was adopted by this one lady. I can't remember her name. But that lady's daughter, Nina, something like this, started with the N. When he was a little boy, she was exploiting him sexually like this. And obviously it had a traumatic effect on him as he grew up psychologically. It just hurt his confidence and everything about him as just a person because, again, he was exploited and violated at such a young, tender age. In other words, as a child, the purity of being a kid or the innocence of being a kid was stripped away from him.
Based on someone else's desire.
Exactly.
Just to please themselves.
Just to please themselves.
And so we're in a society now in which we're just trying to please ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just trying to get mine. Gotta get mine before you get yours. Mm-hmm. And it becomes this competition. Yeah. And it becomes, as you mentioned, a violent competition, a violent race towards degradation of society. Because that's ultimately what's happening. We're not using our intelligence. We're letting the senses dictate, what is most important. And the mind says, without intelligence, sure, And then after the act, we realize, why did I do that? Why did I engage in this activity? Whether it's, think of the different senses we've talked about already. The sense of eating. We eat something which we know is going to be devastating for our stomachs or our bodies, but it's like, it tastes good. So why not? Why not do it? And then after the fact, it's like, oh, that was a terrible idea. Or we see something horrific on the movie we wanted to see, and now that image is seared into our mind. It's like, I can't get rid of this image. Or since we're talking about touch today, now I've experienced a sensation, an inappropriate experience I've committed an inappropriate action based on a sensation that was by nature degraded. Because the mind is being controlled by these different, as we were talking about in 67, chapter 2 of the Gita, the roaming senses are just out here. Where can I get the most pleasure from? If I can get most pleasure from here, I'm going there. It doesn't matter. My intelligent ability is not there. It's in the back seat, because I want to YOLO. Right?
I wanted to mention one thing very briefly. I could not find the best image or picture. But you were talking about this degradation and, this demise, and everyone is just basically running into this pit in one sense. And it made me think of when Arjuna and Krishna, they're on the battlefield. They're in the middle between these two warring families. And Krishna shows Arjuna that Virat Rupa form. Virat meaning universal, Rupa meaning form. So that universal form, and how in that form, now this picture, I'll flip it around and show you guys in a moment. But as you can see in the picture, it doesn't show it, but it's mentioned in the verses how so many individuals are getting crushed in the mouths. I can't remember exactly how that verse goes, but it made me think of that. Like moths, how you see a moth just run straight for a flame and it just gets burned up, and it's as if it doesn't realize, even though it sees so many dead bodies around the flame of other moths that have been burned up. But it's like it doesn't realize that, no, this is not the right way to go. But just how Arjuna is like, I don't know what to do. I'm not willing to fight, And he's like, don't worry. All these people are running to their demise anyway. They're just running into these mouths where there's flames and they're just getting destroyed and burnt up. So that was the first thought that came to my mind. Or that image, I should say. And then in regards to eating and food and so forth, because there is the other sense of hearing. You know, something feels good, something tastes good, something sounds good. You know, and so we hear, you know, from others that, hey, this is what you need to do. There's one young man I remember back in Detroit. The things that he got caught up in, he lives in California now, but the things he got caught up in was because he heard these things from his uncle and his father. And so he got caught up in all these different things and eventually got caught up in drugs and, you know, selling drugs, that is, and eventually got shot, you know, in his leg and stuff like that. You might know who I'm talking about. And of course, moved to, you know, he changed his life. He almost died, but he changed his life. He said, I'm not getting caught up in this. And he, you know, relocates to California with his children and so forth. But it's just when we hear from those we trust, it could be parents, you know, because as children, we think that, okay, yeah, let me listen to my parents because they are our immediate authority.
Right.
Let me listen to them. Oh, they tell me that I need to eat meat, then I must eat meat. Or if the scientist on the commercial says, yes, you must have a diet of this percentage of meat, you know, and that's really the only source of protein that's out there. You must eat meat, you know, it's imperative, or you're going to die and get sick, you know. And we're hearing all these different, what we may think are credible or legit sources. But as we had discussed many moons ago, actually you had mentioned it in regards to our NLP conversations, you know, early podcasts with negative thoughts or negative voices that we hear and questioning them. Like why, you know? What is the proof? Like us doing the research, doing the legwork to find out, is this really true or not? I remember when I had became a vegetarian and my dad was like, son, you need to eat this. Actually, he told me I need to eat eggs. And I was like, Dad, you know I never ate eggs. What kind of suggestion is that? I never liked that stuff to begin with. And he's going to tell me, you need to start eating eggs, son. I'm like, no, I don't care for it. Even as a kid, I never ate eggs. And so he's telling me that, or I need to eat all this meat and this and that. And my mom was like, let's just go to the doctor and let's see what the doctor says. You know, they did the blood work and the doctor said, ma'am, your son is healthy, you know. Yeah. He has plenty of protein, you know, that he's getting from his, you know, beans and, you know, other plant-based proteins. And so my mom just let it go. She was like, he's healthy. He's good. Yeah. You know, so I'm pointing out that we may hear so many things, but even though it may be coming from various different sources, we still need to do our homework. We cannot be lazy in our lives because at the end of the day, we are the ones that are held responsible for the decisions that we make for ourselves. And if we have families, we're making decisions for our spouse and children and so forth. So they're looking up to us to provide sound, logical, you know, information and knowledge and passing down that wisdom. So we have the lives of others in our hands. And we cannot afford to be careless. I mean, carelessness is a major problem that we see in today's society. If someone is careless, whimsical, that's just like someone who's drinking and driving. They're not thinking about the consequences and repercussions that come with not thinking and using critical thinking skills to make logical and sound decisions for themselves, and of course, if they have families, for their families, or if they have a business or they're managing a team or whatever it may be. We have to do our homework and live responsibly.
You mentioned hearing things about hearing things in the home, and oftentimes when we hear things in the home by our parents or siblings, most of the time our parents, because our parents are responsible for teaching us.
They're our first teachers.
They're our first teachers. And so as I got older and I started learning more about life, also engaged in therapy, I realized that my mom, my dad, different family members, if not properly given information or being able to filter what they have heard from their parents, then that idea becomes a generational thought.
Yes.
Or a generational habit.
Yes.
And so most of the time, racism happens because we heard our parents say something that their parents heard or their parents heard. And there's never been anyone to shed a different perspective on it. Or like you were saying with eating, certain habits. Oh, you gotta eat, you need your protein.
Finish your plate.
Finish your plate.
We get self-domesticated.
Yeah. And so it's like, eat all this oily, junky food, but don't forget your vegetables.
I'm full.
But it's like when we hear these things without intelligence, then we take them as, this is fact. And therefore we go in society miseducated.
Miseducated. Yeah.
I was thinking about the song, the album Miseducation of
Lauryn Hill.
Yeah, that was a really good album.
I got it at home.
Okay. But we're so susceptible to getting information that may not be accurate, and because it comes from a person that we trust, then we take that inaccurate information and we make that our thought. Just like, oh, you gotta vote for this party because your parents voted, your grandparents voted for this party, their grandparents voted for this party. It's an hereditary party. Like, we gotta vote for this party.
And if you don't vote for that party, then you're going against your family.
You're going against your family, and they're looking at you strange.
Yeah.
Like,
excommunicated.
He's right. He's left wing. He's right wing. Whatever.
Right.
He's independent. He doesn't vote. Whatever. And so we don't look at anything from both perspectives.
Correct.
The ability to investigate, to dive deeper into something. We don't really do that because it's like, I've heard this, so this makes me feel better in some way, or I'm told this is the best way to go, so therefore I'm not questioning anything. Or, hey, this is the only spiritual practice you should have. And it's like, well, the whole family is doing this, so you should do it too. Well, you know what will happen to you if you don't. Let me pull out this verse. I'll tell you.
They do it exactly like that too.
And it's like we don't understand how indoctrinated our parents, our family are, and how into whatever idea. It doesn't have to even be related to religion, but just political indoctrination, dietary indoctrination, all these different indoctrinations. We just because a family member said it, then therefore that is the law.
Yeah. But I will like to sprinkle in just one little thing.
Sprinkle me. Sprinkle me, man.
I'm just going to start on his way. Pause. Time out. No, word from our sponsors. I want to point out that, because I also had to check myself on this too. I'm not checking you. I'm just saying, I just want to point out something that I've checked myself on, which is, even though our parents and other relatives and grandparents, you know, all the way going back up. And they're telling us, you need to do this or need to do that, or you must eat this way or live your life that way, or this is what it means to be a man, or this is what it means to be a woman. You know how they give us all these different ideas and ideologies and concepts. I always try to remind myself that they are doing the best they can with what they actually have.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes maybe to be in a position where you can do additional research or to slow things down in life and to think about stuff, maybe that's not even possible. And so I try to remind myself that what is it in terms of that they are trying to give to me, and in their own way I can understand and see that although the information may not be right, you know, maybe it's incomplete in some way, maybe there's certain aspects that are missing, you know, details, right? But I know, again, they're doing the best they can with what they got. And the fact that they are talking to me and trying to educate me or direct me in this way and that way, because they love me and they want the best for me. Even though they may not have the best, you know, of knowledge or technology that they're trying to give me. But I know ultimately that they're trying to get me or steer me in the right direction. They're trying to protect me from certain pitfalls that other children who may not have parents or someone in their family to guide them and instruct them may not have those opportunities. At least I was blessed with this family who is doing the very best with what they have to give me the best opportunity that I can possibly have. And when I think about my dad, yeah, my relationship was not the greatest with them. And it gets better. But when I think about all the things that I can do now, I can fix a car, I can work on heating and cooling. I mean, I can do anything. And I'm not just saying it just to say it, just to brag. I mean, the reason why I'm able to do anything is because my mother and my father gave me a foundation upon which I can work. And I just took that foundation that they gave me, fortified it before I started putting up other things, walls. But I started with that, and I was able to do other things through research and investigation and inquiry and so forth. And now I'm able to do so many different things that I'm actually indebted to my mother and father, because at least they gave me something. They could have just left me out there to fend for myself.
There you go. Come on.
It's like a sea turtle, you know. She goes onto the beach, she lays a clutch of eggs, and then she just swims off. And then those little baby sea turtles, soft shell and all, they come out when it's time to hatch. They come out their little eggs. Now they run this gauntlet because there's crabs and there's other birds that are trying to pick at them. And as soon as they get into the water, now they got to deal with the sharks and other aquatics that are there as well. They have to fight for existence, you know. But at least they gave me a reference point, you know, some base, some foundation upon which I can start and take off from there.
Yes.
So that's my only point, is that, yes, we may not have gotten the very, very best in terms of, like, if we're comparing it to like everything that's out there after doing, you know, careful research and investigation. But without a doubt, they gave us the very best that they had. Right. So that we could be successful.
And that goes, and we'll get ready to wrap up here. We'll wrap up here in a couple minutes, but that goes back into the NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, in which one of the presuppositions or the ideas is that anything that is done by someone else, whether we perceive it as good or bad, they're doing that because they feel that is the best option that they have. And because that is the best option that they have, then they are going to do what feels like it's right. Just like, and I'll say this and then as one of the final thoughts is that just like if we are forced in a situation where we have to, we come across someone that's wanting to do us harm, whether we can fight that person. Of course, this all depends on threat level. Or we can see this person is really hurting inside. And therefore, they're yelling. They don't mean to yell, but they don't feel heard in their life.
Yes.
So it's like the action is not appropriate, but it takes intelligence to understand there's more going on than what I'm seeing right now.
Yes. Yes.
And so by having this additional thought, this extra intelligence, then we can determine, okay, what we heard was one thing, but let me use my intelligence to understand on a deeper level
What they're actually saying.
You
know, because a lot of times you're right, and I'll just touch on that very briefly because that's a very good point. A lot of times we may say one thing, hey, are you thirsty? But indirectly, we're saying, actually, I'm very thirsty. Do you mind if I get some water to drink? You know, like that. But that's just a small example.
Yeah.
But this happens, what you described, it happens all the time and in various communities. And sometimes one may act out maybe in a criminal way. They may steal something from another person. You know, crime, like me crying. We talked about this before. Or just even in conversation, they may say something. But it requires the person who has been approached to use intelligence. And I'm just going to say it straight out that where does one get intelligence? Not that has to be answered right now, but I'm just saying, it's like we have sometimes in our own lives, we have sometimes so many things going on. And when another person is talking to us, we may not be able to fully understand what they're truly saying. Like they may be saying one thing verbally, but there's another message that's coming to us, and we're not able to properly decode it and grasp and understand it because it requires a certain amount of intelligence to be able to do so. So the thought that comes to my mind is, of course, slowing things down, like we hear in NLP. They talk about really just slowing things down, really looking at things carefully, what's actually being said, look through things, you know, bit by bit. And then, of course, properly associating with those individuals who have proven, who has a good track record of having high intelligence and reading books from intelligent people so that we can sharpen our intelligence and be able to understand the various ways in which people communicate. Because, in all honesty, and I won't go into too much detail, but when I think about certain situations that I was in, and I tried to my very best to articulate certain things, the other person did not, or the other individuals didn't have the intelligence to be able to understand. Because you know how sometimes if you're not able to fully articulate and share what's in your heart, just like the one gentleman that came in the other day, the educator, teacher. And so there was one little boy, was it third grade, who only spoke Arabic?
Yeah.
And so there's a need for a translator, someone who can understand what is being said, even though the child is trying to say something, but no one is able to understand the language kind of a thing. It's like we have to become, our intelligence allows us to be that translator to understand that message that could be a hidden message in there. Because as human beings, you know, sometimes being able to articulate how you feel and what you're going through is not always easy.
Right.
Because we don't always know if we can trust that person with whom we're speaking. And so there creates this hesitance, or we tend to close up a bit because something may be going on in our lives and we need to inform somebody, but we need them to not react.
Right.
But to actually hear what we're saying.
Yeah.
So that whatever the situation may be can actually get resolved. And if we're not properly hearing, and if we're not using our intelligence to, again, properly and deeply connect with another person, then when I think about all the problems that happen in this world, all the different children who are molested, sexually molested kids, and they cannot speak because they feel that if they say something, then they'll get in trouble and that it was their fault. Because you have some individuals who just don't have the ears to properly hear what the child is trying to say. Or they may think in a workplace, you know, you may have someone at your workplace whose mentality and behavior is in such a way that it may be toxic. But because that person at the workplace is friends with the owner of that business, and you're trying to sincerely articulate to the business owner that, hey, this person that's in your company is toxic or is acting and behaving in such a way that's not appropriate, what have you, like this. And the person who owns the business like, oh, no, that's just such a nice person. No, they would never do anything like that. But you can tell that the person does not have the intelligence to be able to understand what is being relayed to them. And so, you know, I'm just sharing that because these are real things that are happening all the time. Even in relationships, you have a husband and wife, they're trying to share their heart with each other and they're still learning each other, but one spouse is trying to share something that's going on within their own lives, but the other person doesn't have the intelligence to understand what the spouse is saying. And then there's that miscommunication in the relationship, in the marriage, and then there's all this extra friction. You following me? So I'm only just pointing these things out because hearing is very important, and we have to really take the time to not only ask good questions, to see how the other person is doing, but we also have to listen deeply so we can understand what this person is really saying. Otherwise, we'll miss the important message and, you know, nothing gets resolved.
Yeah. We hear what they're saying and not what we think they're saying.
Yeah.
You know. So we went over quite a bit, but there was a couple comments that I wanted to just read really briefly. Let's see here.
That's a big thumb.
Look at that thing. Oh man. So Ebony wrote, yes, lots of beliefs are generational. The great ones, the unproductive and even destructive. I had a friend once who blamed his father for his inability to have healthy relationships. But
it's up to you.
It's up to you, to us, to take steps to unlearn bad habits.
Yes.
And heal so that we don't continue to pass the bad parts to our children.
True. And
Pop said, preach Joseph. That's how great houses are built, sturdy foundation. So anyway, thank you for enjoying and staying attentive during this Friday Flex. So next week we will do this next session, I should say. We're going to talk about the last sense and to kind of wrap it up. And I'll be going to out the country for a couple weeks, but then we'll get back into our flexes. So stay tuned for the next flex.
What would be the next sense?
It will be the sense of smell. Can you smell what we're cooking?
What Mr. Ewan is cooking. All right. Keep flexing, everybody.